The truth of who we are is often a labyrinth, a complex tapestry woven from memory, family, and the choices we make. But what if those threads were deliberately cut, by hands unseen, by a force far more powerful than individual will? What if the very fabric of your identity was not your own to weave, but part of a grand design, a secret experiment shrouded in the cold silence of history? Prepare yourselves, for the story you are about to witness challenges everything you thought you knew about fate, free will, and the unbreakable bonds of blood. Stay with us until the very end to unravel this astonishing mystery and discover the incredible conclusion to a saga that spans decades. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more untold stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Tell us in the comments, from which city are you watching this video? The year was 1961. In the bustling academic heart of Cambridge, Massachusetts, amidst the quiet intellectual hum of its esteemed universities and cutting-edge research institutions, a private joy unfolded within the sterile confines of a respected medical facility. It was here that Sarah and John Miller, a young couple filled with the hopeful anticipation of new parenthood, awaited the arrival of their first child. Little did they know, their lives, and indeed the lives of their offspring, were about to become entangled in a narrative far grander and more chilling than any they could ever imagine. The hours stretched, marked by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the hushed urgency of medical staff. Then, with a cry that heralded life, their first son emerged. A miracle, they thought. But nature, in its boundless and often mysterious wisdom, had another surprise in store. Minutes later, a second cry filled the room, followed swiftly by a third. Against all odds, in an era before widespread fertility treatments, Sarah had given birth to identical triplets, 3 perfect tiny boys, each a mirror image of the other, each a promise of a future yet to be written. John, a man of quiet strength, stood by Sarah's side, his usually stoic face softened by awe and a profound, overwhelming joy. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked from Sarah's exhausted but radiant face to the 3 swaddled bundles. Ethan, Liam, and Noah. They would name them, a trio destined for a life that would defy all convention. Their tiny fingers curled around their parents' hands, unaware of the profound currents already swirling around their nascent existence. Their innocence was absolute, a stark contrast to the calculating minds already observing from the periphery. For across the sprawling, interconnected landscape of American research, in hushed conversations and behind locked doors, a highly classified scientific endeavor was gaining momentum. Its objectives were ambitious, its methods morally ambiguous. This project, veiled in the utmost secrecy, sought to unravel the very essence of human development, to determine the indelible influence of environment versus heredity. And as fate would have it, the birth of 3 perfectly identical healthy boys in Cambridge presented an irresistible, if ethically fraught, opportunity. Unseen by the Millers, but meticulously recorded, the arrival of Ethan, Liam, and Noah was not just a joyous family event. It was the unwitting commencement of a grand, chilling experiment. Their perfect, identical faces, still dewy from birth, were already marked, not by destiny alone, but by the cold, calculating gaze of a scientific pursuit far beyond their comprehension. The vibrant promise of 1961 blossomed into the crisp autumn of 1964, bringing with it the bittersweet beauty of changing leaves across Cambridge. For Sarah and John Miller, those 3 years had been a whirlwind of joy, exhaustion, and the boundless love only parents of young children could know. Their home, a charming, albeit modest, suburban house nestled on a tree-lined street echoed with the delightful chaos of three rambunctious, identical boys. Ethan, Liam, and Noah were now 3 years old, a whirlwind of energy and burgeoning personalities. They chased each other through the small, fenced backyard, their dark hair glinting in the sunlight, their laughter a constant melody that filled every room. John often found himself watching them with a quiet tenderness, while Sarah, despite the unending demands of motherhood, cherished every moment, keenly aware of how quickly these precious years slipped by. Their days were a tapestry of simple, domestic rhythms. Mornings brought the comforting scent of toast and coffee, followed by the joyful clamor of playtime with wooden blocks and well-loved toy trucks. Afternoons often saw them bundled up for a trip to the local park, a neighborhood haven for children, complete with a well-worn sandbox, a creaky swing set that sung a rusty song with every push, and a sturdy wooden slide that offered endless thrills. It was a place of innocence, a microcosm of their sheltered, loving world. This particular afternoon felt no different. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Sarah watched from a nearby bench as her 3 boys, dressed in identical little corduroy overalls, played intently in the sandbox. They were building an elaborate sandcastle, their small faces smeared with dirt and determination. For a fleeting moment, Sarah's attention was drawn to a conversation with a fellow parent, a brief, innocent lapse in her vigilant watch. It was merely seconds, perhaps a minute at most. But in that sliver of time, the world as she knew it irrevocably shifted. When her gaze returned to the sandbox, it was empty. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through her. "Ethan, Liam, Noah?" Her voice, initially a gentle call, quickly escalated into a frantic cry. She scanned the playground, then the surrounding trees, her heart hammering against her ribs. The other parents, sensing her rising panic, joined the search. They combed the park, calling out the boys' names, their voices growing increasingly desperate. But there was no answer, no childish giggle, no familiar flash of dark hair. The red bucket lay abandoned in the sand, a small shovel half buried, a well-loved wooden teddy bear resting innocently by the swing set, silent witnesses to an inexplicable void. The frantic search quickly extended beyond the park. John, arriving home from work to find a scene of agonizing chaos, joined the police and a growing throng of concerned neighbors. Patrol cars descended upon the quiet street, their sirens wailing a mournful song. The media, drawn by the chilling rarity of 3 children disappearing simultaneously, soon arrived, their bright lights and insistent questions adding to the family's torment. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. Every lead proved to be a dead end. Every hope was cruelly dashed. The investigation, once a flurry of activity, slowly dwindled, eventually becoming another unsolved case in the grim archives of missing persons. Sarah and John Miller were left with an unbearable silence in their once vibrant home, haunted by the memory of 3 innocent smiles and the agonizing mystery of their children's vanishing act. The autumn leaves continued to fall, burying not just the remnants of summer, but the lingering hope of an ordinary life, shattered by an event that defied all understanding. The agonizing silence that descended upon the Miller household in Cambridge was mirrored by the hushed, clandestine movements that orchestrated the next phase of the grand design. Unseen hands, cold and methodical, plucked the 3 small boys from their previous lives, erasing their brief, shared history with chilling precision. The fate of Ethan, Liam, and Noah was now sealed, not by chance but by design, as they were spirited away to new, carefully chosen environments, each crafted to serve a specific purpose in the unfolding experiment. Ethan, the firstborn, found himself nestled in the quiet, intellectual embrace of Princeton, New Jersey. His new home was a stately brick house adorned with climbing ivy and surrounded by manicured lawns, a reflection of the sophisticated world inhabited by his adoptive parents. His father, a distinguished university professor, filled the air with academic discourse and the rustle of turning pages. His mother, a serene librarian, surrounded him with books, her gentle voice encouraging an early love for learning. Ethan's childhood was one of quiet contemplation, structured days filled with enriching activities and an endless supply of knowledge. He grew up accustomed to hushed tones, rigorous thought, and the pursuit of intellectual excellence, his mind meticulously shaped by the stimuli of an elite academic environment. The faint, nagging sense of something missing, a ghostly echo of laughter, was easily attributed to childish fantasy, fading under the weight of his demanding studies. Hundreds of miles away, in the bustling industrial heartland of Detroit, Michigan, Liam, with his restless energy, was dropped into a world vastly different from his brother's. His new home was a sturdy, working-class house filled with the warmth of a large, boisterous family. His adoptive father, an honest auto worker, taught him the value of hard labor and camaraderie. His mother, a vibrant homemaker deeply involved in their local church and community, instilled in him a fierce loyalty and a love for practical, hands-on tasks. Liam's childhood was a symphony of clang and chatter, street games with neighborhood kids, and the unwavering support of a tight-knit community. He learned resilience on the factory floor, kindness in the church halls, and the importance of belonging. The occasional, inexplicable wave of déjà vu, a feeling of having experienced a moment before, was dismissed as a trick of the mind, lost in the vibrant clamor of his everyday life. Meanwhile, tucked away in the serene, rolling hills of rural Vermont, Noah, the third triplet, began his life anew on a secluded family farm. Here, his world was one of vast open spaces, the rhythmic ebb and flow of agricultural life, and the quiet dignity of self-sufficiency. His adoptive father, a stoic farmer, taught him the silent language of the land and the rhythms of nature. His mother, a gentle craftswoman, introduced him to the intricate beauty of creation with her skilled hands. Noah's childhood unfolded in solitude, marked by long hours spent amidst fields and forests, cultivating an innate understanding of the natural world and a profound, almost mystical intuition. The inexplicable melancholy that sometimes settled upon him, a vague longing for something he could not name, was simply accepted as part of his sensitive nature, a quiet undercurrent to his peaceful existence. Thus, the lives of the three brothers diverged, meticulously cultivated in their distinct environments, each unaware of the other's existence, each unknowingly a part of a design whose true purpose remained hidden. Their identities were being forged, shaped by circumstance and influence, while the invisible threads of their shared origin lay dormant, waiting for a future distant moment when fate, or perhaps a lingering echo of their shared past, would begin to pull them back together. For 19 years, the secrets of their birth and separation would remain deeply buried, ensuring their continued ignorance in a world that spun heedlessly forward. The years had unspooled, quiet and unassuming, transforming three innocent toddlers into distinct young men, each navigating the cusp of adulthood in their unique corners of America. The calendar had flipped from 1964 to 1980, and Ethan, Liam, and Noah, now 19 years old, stood at the precipice of their independent futures, their lives shaped by the environments they had known, yet subtly haunted by echoes of a past they could not consciously recall. In the hallowed halls of Princeton, New Jersey, Ethan was a rising star, a brilliant college student whose logical mind excelled in intricate problem-solving. His days were a precise calibration of lectures, library research, and intellectual debate. Yet, when night fell, an unsettling pattern began to emerge. His sleep was often disturbed by recurring, fragmented dreams. He would find himself in a sun-drenched playground, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming lilac, the familiar squeak of a swing piercing the dreamscape. Always, there were two other small, blurry figures playing nearby, their laughter just beyond his hearing. He would wake with a profound, inexplicable sadness, a deep ache in his chest that defied any rational explanation. He attributed these unsettling nocturnal journeys to the pressures of his demanding studies, a subconscious release of academic stress. Hundreds of miles to the west, in the vibrant, thrumming heart of Detroit, Liam had embraced his role in the city's industrial pulse. A skilled factory worker, he was outgoing and popular, his hands adept with tools, his spirit grounded in practicality. But even amidst the constant hum of machinery and the easy camaraderie of his colleagues, peculiar moments would sometimes intrude upon his reality. A specific melody on the radio, the taste of a particular food, or the fleeting scent of freshly cut grass would trigger an overwhelming, unexplainable sense of déjà vu. It was more than a feeling of having experienced a moment before. It was a powerful, almost physical sensation of otherness, as if a part of him belonged elsewhere, to a memory just out of reach. He would shake it off with a wry smile, dismissing it as a strange trick of the mind, a momentary glitch in the mundane. Meanwhile, nestled in the serene rolling farmlands of Vermont, Noah, the most sensitive of the three, continued his quiet life, lending his strong hands to his family's farm. His intuition, always keen, had grown sharper with age. He frequently experienced strong premonitions, fleeting glimpses of events yet to unfold, unsettling visions that often proved accurate. More disquieting were the sudden, overwhelming bouts of inexplicable sadness or fear that would wash over him without warning, as if he were feeling someone else's raw emotions. His dreams, too, mirrored Ethan's, often taking him back to a familiar, safe place, a sunlit sandbox, a wooden slide, where two other small, indistinct figures, their faces perpetually blurred, played alongside him. He found solace in the quiet solitude of the fields, grappling with these intense inner experiences that he could neither explain nor dismiss. None of them, in their separate worlds, could have possibly connected these strange, recurring phenomena. Each attributed their unique experiences to personal quirks, to the mysteries of the subconscious, or to the inherent sensitivities of their individual temperaments. The invisible threads that bound them, though stretched across a continent and woven into the fabric of 2 decades, remained hidden. The secret of their origin, meticulously guarded, ensured that these shared echoes of a forgotten past remained just that, unexplained, isolated fragments of a truth waiting to be uncovered. Their separate lives continued, unknowing, towards a convergence that would shatter their individual realities and force them to confront a conspiracy far greater than their wildest imaginings. The academic year in Boston was drawing to a close, a flurry of final lectures and intellectual gatherings that marked the passage of time for Ethan. Now 19 years old, his disciplined mind was fully immersed in the complex theories of his architectural studies, his future trajectory seemingly clear. It was a Saturday, a rare break from his rigorous schedule, and he found himself drawn to a contemporary art exhibition hosted in a large modern gallery space near the city's bustling waterfront. The exhibition promised a fresh perspective, a diversion from the rigid logic of his textbooks, and Ethan, ever the curious observer, sought new stimuli. The gallery hummed with the soft murmur of conversations, the quiet shuffling of feet, and the occasional burst of appreciative laughter. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating various works of art. Ethan moved methodically from piece to piece, his eyes analyzing form and texture, his thoughts detached. Then, as he turned a corner into a less crowded alcove, his steps faltered, his breath hitched in his throat. There, displayed prominently on a stark white pedestal, was a portrait. It was a painting rendered with striking realism, capturing the essence of a young man. But it was not just any young man, it was him. Or rather, an impossibly precise duplicate. The same dark, slightly unruly hair, the same deep-set eyes that held a flicker of something intensely familiar, the same curve of the jawline. Every detail, from the faint scar above the left eyebrow to the precise angle of the shoulders, was his own, yet it stared back at him from the canvas, painted by an unknown hand. A cold wave of unreality washed over Ethan, a dizzying sensation that threatened to unmoor him. He felt a sudden, profound disquiet, a violation of his individuality. Who was this person, and how could he be so utterly, impossibly identical? Just then, from a small crowd gathered at the opposite end of the alcove, a voice rose, clear and confident, describing the painting techniques used. Ethan, still fixated on the portrait, slowly turned his head towards the sound. And then he saw him. Standing by the portrait, engaging with an appreciative audience, was the subject of the painting, alive and breathing. It was the young man from the canvas, speaking with an easy, affable charm. It was him, or rather, another him. Liam, fresh from Detroit and brimming with the eager anticipation of an amateur artist showcasing his work, was relishing the moment. His art, raw and heartfelt, was a natural extension of his pragmatic spirit. He was explaining the emotional landscape behind his work, his hands gesturing expressively, when his gaze, sweeping across the small crowd, suddenly snagged. He saw a young man standing a few yards away, his face pale with shock, his eyes wide. And that young man was him. The same dark hair, the same precise features, the same underlying structure that screamed of an undeniable connection. Liam's carefully constructed composure shattered in an instant. His words caught in his throat, and a wave of pure, disorienting disbelief washed over him. The world seemed to blur around them. The murmur of the crowd faded to a distant hum. Ethan and Liam, 19 years old, stood frozen, their eyes locked across the small distance. Their shared existence, meticulously hidden for nearly 2 decades, had just been revealed in the stark, undeniable reflection of another. It was a moment that transcended mere coincidence, a silent, profound recognition that promised to unravel everything they thought they knew about themselves and their place in the world. The threads of their lives, once so carefully separated, had just snapped together with an audible, chilling click. The initial shock of recognition in the Boston gallery was swiftly followed by an overwhelming urge for answers. Ethan and Liam, still reeling from the sight of their mirror images, found themselves gravitating towards the quiet solitude of a small, unassuming coffee shop nestled in a side street. a desperate need to process the impossible drawing them forward. The aroma of brewing coffee and the hushed clatter of ceramic cups offered a fragile veneer of normalcy to a situation that was anything but. They sat opposite each other at a small, scarred wooden table, their gazes, though identical, conveying a myriad of questions. The conversation began tentatively, a hesitant dance around the edges of their disbelief. Ethan, ever the methodical one, started by laying out the facts of his life. His upbringing in Princeton, his adoptive parents, his academic pursuits. Liam, with his more open and direct manner, reciprocated, detailing his life in Detroit, his blue-collar family, his passion for art that had brought him to Boston. As they spoke, an eerie pattern began to emerge. Each tale, though distinctly different in setting and circumstance, shared a fundamental, inexplicable similarity. Both had been adopted, both as infants, with vague, often hushed stories surrounding their arrival into their new families. The details provided by their adoptive parents were scant, shrouded in euphemisms of special circumstances or private arrangements. The air in the small coffee shop grew heavy with unspoken questions. Their voices, though distinct, held similar inflections, similar rhythms that sent shivers down their spines. Then, a crucial detail, a lightning bolt of undeniable truth, struck. In comparing their official documents, a driver's license for Liam, a college ID for Ethan, they discovered the impossible. Their birth dates were identical. Not just the year, 1961, but the exact month and day. The sheer improbability of two unrelated individuals living hundreds of miles apart, possessing such an uncanny resemblance and sharing the precise moment of their birth, screamed of a connection far deeper than mere coincidence. The realization ignited a fierce, urgent need for further investigation. Their separate lives had collided, forming an undeniable, bewildering puzzle. The first step was to press their adoptive parents for more information, to peel back the layers of polite discretion that had always surrounded their origins. Over the next few days, their phones became lifelines, connecting them to their respective homes. Ethan, with his calm and persistent nature, delicately questioned his Princeton parents, who, while loving, remained vague, recalling only generalities about the out-of-state agency that handled his adoption. Liam, more direct, pressed his Detroit family, who remembered whispers of special circumstances and the arduous paperwork involved, along with a fleeting, almost forgotten mention of a medical facility in Cambridge. The word Cambridge hung in the air, a phantom clue that resonated with a subtle chill. It was the city where Ethan currently resided for his studies, a place steeped in history and intellectual pursuits. The initial answers they received from their adoptive parents were frustratingly limited, filled with gaps and vague recollections of legalities and procedures from 2 decades prior. Yet, within these hesitant admissions, a few common threads began to weave themselves into a nascent pattern. Both adoptions had been swift, seemingly unusual, and handled by discreet intermediaries. There was a pervasive sense of secrecy surrounding the initial arrangements, a feeling that something had been deliberately obscured. The brothers were now operating on instinct, driven by an overwhelming hunger for the truth. Their individual searches had ended, replaced by a joint quest, propelled by the unsettling certainty that their lives, once separate streams, were in fact part of a much larger, darker river, its source hidden in the depths of a carefully constructed deception. They felt an irresistible pull towards Cambridge, towards the place where their separate lives might have first intersected. The fragmented clue of Cambridge reverberated with an unsettling significance for Ethan and Liam. but it was a single cryptic mention of a child development study in old public records, stumbled upon by Ethan's academic connections, that truly ignited their next step. The record, barely legible and buried deep within an obscure university archive, hinted at an off-campus research component, vaguely referencing a rural setting. The brothers, fueled by a potent blend of hope and trepidation, pinpointed rural Vermont as their next destination. It was a leap of faith, a desperate pursuit of a whisper in the wind, but the undeniable bond that had sparked between them urged them forward. Their journey from the bustling avenues of Boston to the serene, winding roads of Vermont felt like a passage through time itself. The urban sprawl gradually receded, replaced by rolling hills, dense forests just beginning to show the subtle blush of early autumn, and isolated farmhouses nestled among fields of drying corn. The air grew crisper, scented with pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the salty tang of the Massachusetts coast. As they drove deeper into the countryside, the weight of their impossible quest settled around them, a palpable presence in the quiet car. Every passing sign, every distant farmhouse held the potential to hide a piece of their fragmented past. They discussed their theories in hushed tones, piecing together the scant details, their shared intuition, a silent compass guiding their way. They arrived in a small, sleepy Vermont village, its handful of weathered buildings clustered around a general store and a lone church steeple. The few locals they cautiously approached offered friendly but ultimately unhelpful smiles and shrugs. Their vague inquiries about old child studies or special adoptions from 2 decades prior were met with blank stares or polite dismissal. The trail, it seemed, had grown cold with the passage of time, covered by the quiet rhythms of rural life. A sense of discouragement began to creep in, threatening to extinguish the fragile hope that had brought them so far. Perhaps they were chasing ghosts, misled by coincidence and desperate longing. It was on an unassuming dirt road winding through a patchwork of pastures and dense woods on the outskirts of the village that fate intervened with a force that defied all logic. Ethan was driving slowly, carefully navigating the uneven terrain, while Liam scanned the landscape, his gaze sweeping across a distant field where a lone figure worked. As they rounded a gentle bend, a young man emerged from a narrow lane that led to a secluded farmhouse. He was walking towards them, his frame solid and purposeful, carrying a worn toolbox, clearly returning from a day of work on the land. His dark hair, slightly longer than theirs, was dusted with soil, and his strong hands spoke of a life spent in physical labor. As their car drew closer, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows, but it could not obscure the impossible truth that unfolded before their eyes. The young man on the road was a mirror image. His face, though marked by a different life, held the undeniable, chilling familiarity of their own. Every feature, from the curve of his brow to the set of his jaw, was startlingly identical. The air in the car crackled with a sudden, electrifying silence. Ethan's foot instinctively pressed the brake, bringing the vehicle to a slow, shuddering halt. Liam, his hand flying to the window, could only stare, his mouth agape. The young man on the road, Noah, his mind still on the day's farm tasks, registered the approaching car. He looked up, his gaze steady, then faltered. His brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and an unsettling recognition that vibrated deep within his intuitive core. He saw not 2 strangers, but 2 reflections, 2 impossibly familiar faces staring back at him from the vehicle. His hand instinctively tightened around the toolbox, his body tensing, not in fear, but in profound, bewildered shock. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, broken only by the gentle hum of the idling engine and the distant chirping of crickets. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. The golden light of the Vermont afternoon bathed the scene, illuminating 3 identical figures standing on a forgotten rural road, their lives, once separate and unknown to each other, now irrevocably intertwined. The unspoken truth hung in the air, undeniable and overwhelming. It was not just one, but 2 identical strangers who stood before Ethan and Liam. And for Noah, the 2 men in the car were not strangers at all, but fragmented memories made flesh. The pieces of their shattered past were beginning to coalesce, not in a dusty archive, but on a sun-drenched road in the quiet heart of Vermont, signaling the beginning of a reunion that would redefine their very identities. The universe, it seemed, had finally brought them together, not by accident, but by a powerful, undeniable force that transcended all human design. The sun dipped below the Vermont hills, casting long purple shadows as Ethan, Liam, and Noah retreated from the rural road, the stunning reality of their encounter settling heavily around them. Noah, still reeling, led them through a narrow path to the secluded farmhouse that had been his home for 19 years. His adoptive parents, simple, kind folk, met the 2 strangers with a mixture of surprise and open curiosity, their rural hospitality quickly overcoming any initial shock at the uncanny resemblance. Inside the rustic, comfortable kitchen, warmed by the faint scent of wood smoke and freshly baked bread, the 3 brothers finally sat down, the silence between them thick with unspoken questions and a profound, unsettling recognition. The first few moments were a landscape of averted gazes and hesitant gestures, each young man struggling to articulate the impossible weight of the present. Ethan, the most analytical, broke the quiet, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He recounted his recurring dreams, the playground, the blurry figures, the squeak of a swing. Liam, leaning forward, his eyes wide with dawning revelation, immediately recognized the details. He spoke of his own inexplicable bouts of déjà vu, the sudden vividness of familiar smells, damp earth, blooming lilac, that transported him to a place he could not name. And then Noah, his gaze distant, confirmed their shared experience with a quiet, powerful conviction, describing his premonitions and the vivid dreams of a sunlit sandbox, a wooden slide, and 2 other children. As they cautiously, painstakingly pieced together these fragmented recollections, a mosaic of a shared infancy began to emerge. Each detail, once dismissed as a random flicker of the subconscious, now interlocked with terrifying precision. They all remembered the particular sensation of rough sand beneath their small hands, the specific, comforting weight of a well-loved, slightly threadbare teddy bear that one of them, perhaps all, had cherished. There was the distinct pattern of a chipped paint on a swing-set pole, the cool metallic taste of a small toy car, the distant muffled sound of an ice cream truck. These were not just similar memories. They were identical fragments, pieces of a single, shared early childhood, undeniable proof that their lives, once believed to be separate from birth, had in fact been intricately intertwined. The realization was a heavy, suffocating blanket, followed by a surge of overwhelming collective emotion. The playful innocence of their earliest recollections quickly gave way to a more sinister truth, a deeper, darker memory that had been buried beneath 2 decades of separate lives. As if a dam had broken, the traumatic moment of their separation began to surface, not as individual recollections, but as a terrifying, shared flashback. They remembered the playground, yes, but the light fading too quickly. They remembered the warmth of their mother's presence. Then a sudden jarring shift. Hands, cold and unfamiliar, seizing them. The terrifying sensation of being lifted, pulled away from everything familiar. A sudden, blinding darkness punctuated by muffled sounds and the terrifying, silent panic of childhood fear. The feeling of falling, then being confined in a small, enclosed space, the air thick with an unknown scent. And then, waking up in utterly unfamiliar surroundings, with new faces, new voices, new sensations, the comforting warmth of their previous world abruptly gone. Liam recalled the metallic taste of fear in his mouth, the desperation to cry out, but finding no sound. Ethan felt the crushing weight of confinement, the sudden, bewildering absence of light and familiar smells. Noah, deeply intuitive, experienced the visceral terror of being separated from his siblings, a primal severing that resonated with an aching emptiness he had carried unknowingly for years. The shared memory of their abduction was vivid, raw, and utterly horrifying. It was not just a disappearance. It was a kidnapping, a calculated act that had severed them from their birth family and from each other. The air in the quiet farmhouse kitchen grew taut with their collective grief and rising fury. They were not merely three adopted boys who looked alike. They were triplets, deliberately separated and orchestrated into new lives. The vague hints, the missing pieces in their adoption stories, the persistent feelings of being incomplete. It all converged into a single, undeniable truth. This was no coincidence. This was a design. This was a violation. The implications were staggering, stretching far beyond their personal pain. It meant their entire lives, their identities, their very existence, had been a construct, a manipulated outcome of an unseen, powerful force. This revelation, born from shared fragmented memories, transformed their confusion into a burning resolve. The questions now were not about if they were connected, but how and why. And they knew with an unshakable certainty that they would find the answers, no matter the cost. The silence of the farmhouse was now filled with the unspoken pact of three brothers, united by a shared past and a terrifying, undeniable truth. The raw emotional intensity of their shared memories, the terrifying collective recollection of abduction, left Ethan, Liam, and Noah with an unshakable clarity. Their lives were not simply products of chance. They were consequences of a deliberate act, a calculated intervention. The overwhelming shock began to give way to a potent, burning desire for answers, a primal need to understand who had orchestrated their separation and why. Gathered around the worn kitchen table in Noah's Vermont farmhouse, a map of the United States spread between them, they began to pool their disparate pieces of information, each detail a potential thread in the tangled tapestry of their past. Ethan, with his analytical mind, took charge of mapping their known locations. Cambridge, Massachusetts stood out as the undeniable point of origin, the place of their birth, the nexus where their brief, shared infancy had been brutally severed. Then, like spokes from a wheel, radiated their adoptive homes: Princeton, New Jersey, the hub of academic rigor; Detroit, Michigan, the heart of industrial America; and the quiet, rural expanses of Vermont, where Noah had found his roots. The geographical disparity, coupled with their identical birth date and shared early memories, screamed of a planned, systemic operation rather than a random act of abduction. Their immediate focus shifted to identifying any research or governmental activity from the early 1960s that could possibly explain such a monstrous endeavor. They reasoned that an operation of this scale, involving the meticulous placement of children, had to be either a clandestine government program or a highly secretive scientific study. Ethan, leveraging his university connections and his aptitude for research, immersed himself in the labyrinthine world of academic databases and obscure scientific journals. He combed through brittle, yellowed papers and microfiche files, searching for any anomalies, any research that pushed the boundaries of conventional ethics. His perseverance eventually yielded a chilling set of obscure academic papers and thinly veiled research reports. These documents, often published under innocuous titles, made veiled references to longitudinal studies on environmental impact on identity formation and novel approaches to early childhood development. The most disturbing aspect was their consistent link to a specific, highly regarded research institution located not far from Boston, a place known for pioneering work in various scientific fields. The language was academic, almost clinical, but beneath the detached scientific prose, Ethan sensed a cold, calculating ambition. Meanwhile, Liam, with his down-to-earth practicality and ability to connect with people, took on the task of tracing their early days in Cambridge. He traveled back to the city, his identical features a constant, unnerving reminder of his quest. He visited the Cambridge medical facility where they were born, posing as a history student, researching early neonatal care. It was there, through persistent, gentle inquiry, that he managed to find an elderly, retired nurse, a woman named Agnes, who had been on staff in 1961. Her memory, though faded by time, still held fragments of the past. Agnes, her voice hushed, remembered the unusual birth of the triplets, a truly rare occurrence. More importantly, she recalled an unusual transfer that happened a few years later. She spoke of men in dark suits, stern and official-looking, who had arrived at the facility and handled the transfer of the infants with an almost unsettling efficiency, circumventing standard protocols. Her words were vague, filled with the fear and confusion of a woman who had witnessed something she instinctively knew was wrong, but could not articulate. The memory still clearly troubled her, even after 2 decades. Simultaneously, Noah, guided by his profound intuition and deep connection to the history of the land, focused on the local records in Vermont. He possessed an uncanny ability to sense truth, to feel the resonance of past events in forgotten places. He spent hours sifting through dusty town archives, old land deeds, and municipal records, looking for anything out of place in the early 1960s. His patient, almost meditative search eventually unearthed vague, almost ephemeral references to special placements of children in rural areas during that period, often under the guise of federal oversight or rural development initiatives. These records, sparse and deliberately uninformative, nonetheless contained a chillingly consistent detail. A name, scrawled repeatedly in the margins or attached to the most cryptic entries, Dr. Thorne. The name resonated with a cold, almost predatory energy that sent shivers down Noah's spine. As the brothers reconvened, piecing together their individual findings, the puzzle began to take a terrifyingly clear shape. The academic papers Ethan found, the retired nurse's fearful whispers to Liam, and Noah's discovery of Dr. Thorne in obscure rural records all converged onto a single chilling conclusion. This was not a random act of abduction. This was a deliberate, large-scale, and highly sophisticated operation, orchestrated by powerful individuals, likely within the scientific community, and potentially with covert governmental backing. The very idea that their lives, their identities, had been manipulated from infancy, transformed into variables in a grand, unethical experiment, sent a wave of cold fury through them. The initial confusion had dissipated, replaced by a burning certainty. They were not merely searching for answers. They were on the precipice of uncovering a monumental truth, a secret so profound it threatened to shake the very foundations of ethical science. And the name Dr. Thorne now echoed with a sinister clarity in their minds, pointing the way to the heart of the conspiracy. The name Dr. Thorne now resonated with a chilling clarity, a singular focus for the brothers' combined efforts. The fragmented clues had coalesced into a terrifying yet undeniable direction. Their quest had narrowed to a specific individual and a shadowy research institution near Boston, a nexus of intellect and ambition where the unthinkable might have been conceived and executed. Time was of the essence, not just to satisfy their burning curiosity, but to confront the specter of a past that refused to stay buried. Ethan, with his innate talent for academic inquiry, took the lead in delving deeper into the institutional archives. His days were spent in the hushed, dusty silence of university libraries and specialized research collections. He scoured forgotten bibliographies, cross-referenced footnotes, and traced the lineage of scientific thought. What he uncovered were more specific, though still carefully veiled, references to Dr. Thorne's work. The language used in these old publications was deceptively benign, discussing pioneering studies in human potential and longitudinal tracking of early childhood development. Yet, to Ethan's now enlightened eye, the words masked a darker intent. He found articles that hinted at methodologies relying on strictly controlled environments, on the purification of variables, a chilling euphemism for the manipulation of lives. There was a cold, clinical detachment in the prose that spoke of subjects, not children, of data points, not human beings. The more he read, the more he understood the immense, sophisticated effort that must have gone into concealing the true nature of Thorne's research. Meanwhile, Liam, with his directness and ability to navigate disparate social circles, took on the challenging task of locating anyone who had worked directly with Dr. Thorne or had been involved in his projects. He spent days walking the streets of Cambridge and Boston, visiting old neighborhoods, lingering near former research facilities, asking quiet questions. He spoke to retired professors, former lab technicians, and even old administrative staff, often meeting a wall of polite but firm resistance. Many remembered Dr. Thorne as brilliant, pioneering, but distant. Others simply feigned ignorance, their eyes betraying a flicker of unease or a deep-seated fear. Liam sensed the unspoken truths, the lingering shadows of secrets too dangerous to reveal. It was clear that the project, whatever its true nature, had instilled a profound sense of caution, if not outright terror, in those who had been privy to its inner workings. The fear he encountered was not for themselves, but for something larger, something systemic. As Ethan and Liam pursued these separate yet intertwined paths, Noah remained their quiet, intuitive compass. Though geographically distant in Vermont, his unique sensitivity allowed him to guide their efforts, sifting through their conflicting findings. He would listen to their frustrated phone calls, absorb the subtle shifts in their voices, and offer insights that defied logic, pointing them towards specific avenues of investigation that later proved fruitful. His premonitions, once a source of personal unease, now served as an invaluable, if unsettling tool in their desperate quest. He sensed the truth lurking beneath the surface, the specific people who might hold the missing pieces, even when the rational paths seemed blocked. It was Noah's intuitive nudges, combined with Ethan's meticulous cross-referencing of staff rosters and Liam's persistent inquiries, that ultimately led them to a specific name, Eleanor Vance. She had been an administrative assistant to Dr. Thorne in the early 1960s, her name appearing on faded payroll sheets and internal memos. Her contact information, old and almost untraceable, suggested a life lived quietly, far from the academic world. After days of relentless searching, they managed to find her address in a secluded, unremarkable suburb hours from Boston. The hope was fragile, but real. They knew that if anyone held the final damning pieces of their past, it would be someone like Eleanor Vance, a person who had witnessed the quiet machinery of the project from within, and perhaps carried the heavy burden of its secrets for decades. The pursuit of truth had taken them to the doorstep of a woman who might finally unlock the horrifying reality of their shared existence. The small, unremarkable suburb where Eleanor Vance resided was a world away from the academic grandeur of Cambridge, yet its quiet streets held the key to the brothers' shattering truth. Ethan, Liam, and Noah stood before her modest, aging house, its weathered facade betraying nothing of the monumental secret held within. The air was thick with a nervous anticipation that transcended their individual personalities, a shared tremor that vibrated through their very bones. They knocked, their hearts pounding in unison, on the chipped paint of the front door. Eleanor Vance, a woman in her late 70s, with a wispy halo of white hair and eyes that held the haunted depths of a long-kept secret, opened the door just a crack. Her initial expression was one of wary confusion, but as her gaze fell upon the three identical young men, her eyes widened in a mixture of disbelief and profound dread. The blood drained from her face, leaving it ashen, and her frail hand instinctively reached for the doorframe, as if to steady herself. Without a word, she allowed them entry, her silence a confirmation of their darkest fears. Inside, the living room was dim, cluttered with a lifetime of unassuming possessions that seemed to mock the gravity of the moment. Eleanor sank into an old, faded armchair, her movements slow and deliberate, as if each action carried an immense weight. The brothers remained standing, their presence filling the small space with an undeniable intensity. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until Eleanor finally spoke, her voice a brittle whisper, laden with decades of guilt. "You're the triplets," she stated, not as a question, but as a painful, exhausted affirmation. Her words hung in the air, shattering the last vestiges of doubt. Then, haltingly at first, but with growing momentum born of a desperate need for confession, she began to unravel the tapestry of deception. She had been a young, ambitious administrative assistant to Dr. Albert Thorne at the research institution near Boston in the early 1960s. Thorne, a brilliant but ruthlessly ambitious scientist, had conceived of an audacious, morally bankrupt experiment. He believed that human behavior, intelligence, and even personality could be engineered or profoundly shaped by environmental factors, regardless of genetic predisposition. The Cold War era, with its hunger for scientific breakthroughs and its willingness to push ethical boundaries in the name of national superiority, had provided him with a fertile ground for his chilling hypothesis. Eleanor confirmed the brothers' most terrifying suspicion. They had been intentionally separated. "You were part of the Thorne identity formation study," she whispered, her gaze fixed on some unseen point in the past. Triplets were ideal. Identical genetics, but placed in completely different environments to observe the outcome. She recounted the meticulous planning, the careful selection of diverse adoptive families in different states: Princeton, Detroit, rural Vermont, each representing a distinct sociological landscape. She confirmed they were indeed taken at age 3, after their initial 3 years together had provided Thorne with baseline observations on their nascent shared development. Their disappearance had been meticulously staged to avoid suspicion, a network of discreet intermediaries and falsified documents obscuring the truth. The scale of the project, its chilling audacity, washed over the brothers in waves of cold, disbelieving fury. Eleanor detailed how Thorne had justified his work, citing the potential to optimize human potential and cultivate ideal citizens. But it was all a lie, a scientific facade for a cruel, inhumane act of manipulation. She spoke of the project's subsequent suppression and the frantic, systematic destruction of records when ethical oversight committees began to ask uncomfortable questions in the early 1970s. Thorne, powerful and well-connected, had managed to bury the truth, protecting his reputation while his subjects lived on in ignorance. Perhaps the most unsettling revelation was Eleanor's description of the monitoring that had been a subtle, pervasive part of their lives. Occasional visits from representatives, often disguised as social workers or educational researchers, were not random occurrences, but carefully orchestrated check-ins to track their development, to record their choices, to observe the experiment in real time. The vague, unsettling feeling they sometimes had of being watched, of something being not quite right, had been frighteningly real. The truth, once a desperate, abstract concept, now had a name, a face, and a horrifying history. The air in the room vibrated with the weight of it, with the raw emotions that erupted from the brothers. A profound grief for the childhood stolen, an incandescent rage at the scientist who had dared to play God, and a chilling understanding of the forces that had shaped their very beings. The fragments had finally connected, forming a terrifying, undeniable picture of manipulation and betrayal. Eleanor Vance, her confession complete, now looked at the three men before her, her eyes filled with a desperate plea for understanding, a fragile hope for absolution after decades of silent torment. The horrifying revelation had finally been spoken aloud, and the world of Ethan, Liam, and Noah would never again be the same. The last echoes of Eleanor Vance's confession hung heavy in the air, a devastating silence filling the small living room. The truth, once a desperate whisper in their minds, was now a roaring gale, tearing through the carefully constructed realities of their 19 years. For Ethan, Liam, and Noah, the world had just cracked open, revealing a horrifying abyss where their identities should have been. The immediate aftermath was an overwhelming deluge of raw, unbridled emotion, a searing wave of incandescent anger at the cold, calculating minds that had orchestrated their lives, a profound, aching grief for the stolen innocence of a shared childhood, a bewildering confusion at the sheer audacity of the deception, and a deep, cutting sense of betrayal that transcended personal pain. Each brother processed the cataclysmic revelation in his own distinct way. Ethan, the architect of logic and reason, grappled with the sheer, monstrous ethical implications. His mind, accustomed to precision and order, wrestled with the utter lawlessness of Dr. Thorne's experiment. He felt a deep, intellectual violation, a rage that his very existence had been reduced to a variable, a data point in someone else's twisted equation. His fists clenched, his jaw set, he silently battled the urge to find every last person involved and demand a reckoning that no court of law could provide. Liam, the emotional heart of the trio, found himself overwhelmed by a crushing wave of pain. The artistic sensitivity that allowed him to express beauty now magnified the agony of their lost past, the ghost of a shared biological family he had never known. Tears, hot and unbidden, streamed down his face, not just for himself, but for the tiny, 3-year-old boys who had been snatched from a loving home. He felt the phantom touch of a biological mother's hand, the echo of a biological father's voice, a profound sense of deprivation that left him gasping for air. His sorrow was raw, unfiltered, a primal cry for what had been so cruelly taken. Noah, the intuitive and deeply connected, felt the trauma resonate not just in his mind, but in the very core of his being. He had often felt an inexplicable emptiness, a yearning for an unknown connection. Now, the reason for that emptiness was laid bare, a deliberate severing of bonds that should have been sacred. His response was a quiet, intense mix of profound sadness and a burning indignation. He understood the depth of the violation on an almost spiritual level, feeling the ripples of their fractured past throughout his very soul. He saw not just the scientific experiment, but the cold, clinical dehumanization of 3 innocent lives. As the initial storm of emotion began to subside, a new daunting question emerged. Their biological parents. Were they still alive? Did they know? The thought of reaching out, of confronting them, with such a devastating truth, after 2 decades of presumed loss, was almost unbearable. After long, painful discussions, punctuated by renewed waves of anguish, the brothers reached a difficult, agonizing decision. To seek out their biological parents, to rip open old wounds, would be to inflict a renewed trauma, to shatter lives that had perhaps found a semblance of peace in their grief. And in that moment of profound empathy, they also acknowledged the deep love and unwavering care of their adoptive families. These men and women who had raised them, cherished them, and provided them with homes were their parents in every meaningful sense. The choice was not to deny their past, but to protect those who had loved them. And then, amidst the ashes of their shattered history, a new, powerful force began to emerge, their unbreakable bond. They were not just 3 individuals linked by a shared traumatic past. They were brothers, forged in the crucible of a dark secret. Liam reached out a hand, then Ethan, and finally Noah, their hands clasping together in a silent, powerful affirmation. Their shared trauma, far from tearing them apart, had created an unyielding connection, a profound understanding that transcended words. They were unique yet identical, violated yet resilient. In each other, they found not just family, but strength, validation, and a profound sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. They accepted their unique, complicated history, not as a curse, but as a testament to their survival, to the enduring power of human connection against even the most calculating of designs. The Vermont farmhouse, once just a place of revelation, now became the crucible of their rebirth, their collective acceptance the first step on a new, uncharted path. The horrifying truth revealed by Eleanor Vance, though a wound that would never fully heal, paradoxically became the very foundation upon which Ethan, Liam, and Noah built their new lives. The storm of rage and grief gradually subsided, replaced by a profound sense of shared purpose. They understood, with a clarity that transcended the pain, that their existence was no longer merely their own. It was a testament, a living document against the cold ambition of unchecked science and the chilling disregard for human dignity. Their individual paths, once so disparate, now converged into a powerful, unbreakable constellation. They forged a new life together, one anchored in constant connection. The miles that separated Princeton, Detroit, and rural Vermont became insignificant. Phone calls, lengthy and deeply personal, became a daily ritual. weekend visits transformed into sacred gatherings, marked by the easy camaraderie of brothers who had found each other against impossible odds. They learned to navigate the nuances of their reunited bond, celebrating their individuality even as they cherished their profound sameness. They were a family, not by chance, but by the relentless pull of truth and the enduring strength of shared experience. Their individual trajectories, already in motion, took on new, deeper meaning infused with the wisdom gleaned from their traumatic past. Ethan, with his sharp intellect and passion for architecture, channeled his energies into projects with a profound social impact. He began designing community spaces, structures that fostered connection and belonging, a silent rebuttal to the forced isolation of his own early years. His designs became known not just for their aesthetic beauty, but for their inherent humanity. His work a quiet advocacy for environments that nurture, rather than manipulate, the human spirit. He found purpose in building, both physically and metaphorically, the kind of world Thorne had sought to control. Liam, the artist, found his canvases imbued with a newfound depth and intensity. The inexplicable feelings of otherness that had once haunted him now found powerful expression in his vibrant, raw creations. His art explored themes of identity, the intricate dance between nature and nurture, and the profound resilience of human connection. His paintings, once merely a hobby, began to garner serious attention, resonating with audiences on a visceral level. He painted not just from personal experience, but from a universal wellspring of human longing and the quiet triumph of the spirit. His art a living testament to the truth his life embodied. Noah, the intuitive and deeply connected, continued his life on the Vermont farm, his connection to the land deepening further. His heightened senses, once a source of personal perplexity, now served a quiet, profound purpose. He became more attuned to the subtle rhythms of the world, a sensitive guardian of the natural order. While his life remained rooted in rural simplicity, his understanding of the complexities of the human condition, born from his own extraordinary journey, enriched his spirit. He found his voice in the quiet wisdom of nature, a silent advocate for balance and respect in a world capable of such profound imbalance. The brothers, in their collective wisdom, made a powerful decision. They would use their story, not for vengeance or public scandal, but for education and prevention. They understood the power of their shared narrative, its capacity to illuminate the dark corners of scientific hubris and advocate for ethical research and human rights. They began discreetly, speaking to small academic groups, sharing their experiences with legal scholars and medical ethicists. As the 1980s drew to a close, and the global landscape shifted with the fading shadows of the Cold War, a new era of transparency began to emerge. Governments slowly started declassifying once secret documents, and the climate became more receptive to uncomfortable truths. It was in this evolving climate that the brothers, now in their early 30s, decided to reveal their story more openly. They chose a respected investigative journalist, a woman known for her integrity and meticulous research, to help them craft their narrative. The resulting exposé, published first as a series of articles in a national magazine and later adapted into a groundbreaking documentary, sent shockwaves across the nation. It exposed the chilling details of the Thorne identity formation study, naming names, detailing the deliberate abductions, and revealing the profound ethical violations that had been meticulously concealed for decades. The public was horrified, captivated by the unimaginable cruelty and the incredible resilience of the three men. The story ignited a vital national conversation about oversight in scientific research, the sanctity of human life, and the potential for abuse when ambition overrides ethics. Dr. Albert Thorne, long retired and living a life of quiet luxury, was finally stripped of his accolades, his legacy forever stained by the monstrous truth. The institution, while condemning Thorne's rogue actions, was forced to confront its past complicity, leading to significant reforms in research protocols. For Ethan, Liam, and Noah, the public revelation brought a strange mix of relief and renewed scrutiny. But they stood together, unyielding, their bond fortified by every challenge. Their biological parents, if they were still alive, remained untouched by the public revelation, their peace preserved by the brothers' compassionate choice. The Millers and their adoptive families, initially shocked by the full scope of the deception, stood by their sons with unwavering love and support, their own roles as true parents only strengthened by the ordeal. The story of the triplets, the Thorne brothers, became a powerful testament to the enduring human spirit, a beacon against the darkness of scientific overreach. It proved beyond any doubt that even the most meticulous designs of separation could not extinguish the fundamental, unbreakable bonds of family, identity, and the resilient, triumphant heart of humanity. They were not products of an experiment. They were survivors, authors of their own extraordinary new chapter.